I'm David Gregory with our Meet the Press Take Two Web Extra, and we're back with our panel this morning. Got a lot of questions from the website, from the Twitter boards as well. Actually, Ron, this is interesting, something that came through my discussion on Twitter this week. People wanting to know what was in the final version of this bill that was not in the original calculus of the administration that actually might be important or make the bill stronger.
Well, there's certainly elements that were not part of the original calculation. I think the biggest, in dollar terms, is the AMT patch, which was put in largely at the request of Senate Republicans. Helps upper middle class families, especially in blue states, avoid higher taxes. And you know, there were other changes here in terms of more education spending, probably, and maybe even a little more on the health care safety net than Obama originally intended. But if you look at the overall package and the distribution of tax cuts versus spending, it is remarkably close to where he set out, and in remarkable time. And you compare this, of course, to like Ronald Reagan or President Clinton, all the way to the end of July to pass their economic package. This is in 3 weeks, unifying his own party and facing almost unified opposition.
Here's a question from Michelle Saranovich-Derici, and this is a question for the round table about what it all means. I want to ask, what really will the stimulus do for people who are on the brink of being homeless due to health issues and are making decisions between proper health care and paying their mortgages to one of the banks bailed out by the federal government? Gene?
What will the stimulus itself do for that person? Probably not a whole lot immediately. Now, what can perhaps be done for that person somewhere in the bailout and stimulus nexus of hundreds of billions of dollars and all these instructions is an instruction to the banks to try to work with these with homeowners in that sort of situation, to redo mortgages and. So that's about all.
Actually, one of the things that spends, one of the biggest line items in this is subsidies for people to maintain insurance who are unemployed. For people who to try to, under the so-called COBRA plan, to get insurance, health insurance from their prior employers. And obviously, I think that the key thing on that, on the mortgage side, will be President Obama is announcing this week in Arizona, fascinatingly, as a political point, more details about his plan to help people stay in.
I was really interested, and I raised this with David Axelrod too, to help people who are having a problem making their payments right now. This was interesting. If you adjust their payments to 31% of their income, first of all, they've got a lot of debt out there that's outstanding. Can they still make the payments? And the other part is, isn't it easier if you're a homeowner and you're underwater in your mortgage, which means that your house is worth less than what you owe on it, that you'd rather just walk away and preserve your principal rather than lower the payments, because then you have a chance to get into the market a couple of years down the line. The government's got to figure that part of it out, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, one part of the problems with this cram down is which is the word you use, is talking about giving bankruptcy judges the ability to change your principal or to change your payments, to change your interest rates, is that it's going to have a bigger effect on homeowners down the road. In that, not necessarily these ones. In that, one reason why mortgage rates are lower, interest rates are lower than, say, like credit card interest rates, is because contracts have always been fairly sacrosanct, and that meant that mortgage lenders had the assurity that they were going to get paid back. If you start giving judges the ability to fiddle around with that, you may have mortgage companies that try to build in for that by simply raising rates for everybody down the road. And then the question is, do you get future homeowners to buy in, and does this actually help the housing market?
Also, in terms of selling this to the public, it's the opposite of not in my backyard. Your neighbor is saying, I want this in my backyard. I didn't take out a bad loan. I didn't accept a mortgage I couldn't afford. I accepted a realistic one. I'm paying to my limits. Yeah, I can pay it. How come I don't get a forgiveness from the bank? How come I don't get my mortgage rate reduced? And there are a lot more of those people out there than people who are going to be foreclosed. I feel terrible about the people who are going to be foreclosed. But there is a problem here of how you sell this to the public at large that's going to catch up with the administration at some point.
When there's a foreclosure, everybody on the block and the surrounding block. It's sort of like the broken windows theory on social prices. It's very similar.
It is a selling problem.
It is tough.
A lot of people that I'm talking to online are asking about bipartisanship. This was a question from Chris Kay. The president ran on a platform of change and bipartisanship with the stimulus package passing narrowly along party lines, including the Senate Democrats who voting against it in the House. How do you think this foreshadows the president's bipartisan plans involving members of Congress? This came up, Gene, in terms of where they go next. And Axelrod on the program today said, no. pedal to the metal here. We'll be nice, but we're not saps here. We're going to keep going.
Right. And they feel they have to keep going. And look, I think Obama gets a certain amount of credit for having for his display of bipartisanship, for going to meet with the Republicans, for involving them in the discussions, I think the administration's story is, we're going to continue to try to be nice to them and bring them along, but there are core philosophical differences, and as the administration has pointed out a couple of times, we won the election. Right. So sometimes they don't want to.
But it's interesting. Democrats were out of their minds when George Bush used the specter of 9/11 and fear to get things done. And what did the president do this week? He said, if we don't act now, this crisis could be so bad we may not be able to reverse it, Roger.
Right. He has to scare people to death and then give them hope. He really does. Right. Because to accept all these deficits, to accept these bailouts which reward bad behavior, you have to be scared to death. Yeah. You have to say there's no alternative. And then you have to say, however, with these plans, with this policy, we do have a chance of making it. Maybe only a 70% chance, as Joe Biden said, but we have a chance. And without that scaring people, he's just not going to get the support. But I think he can't scare himself against using the majorities he has. I mean, going back to Gene's point, he did win. The Democrats did win. He's got majorities in the House and Senate. It would be foolish not to use those majorities when those majorities will work.
But the question is also, what does he mean by bipartisanship? I was fascinated this week when Gregg resigned from Commerce Secretary. The reason the Obama administration took him on is because they wanted to get credit for reaching out to the other side, bringing a guy in, diversity of viewpoints, the whole team of rivals thing. When he took himself out of the running, there was a very odd statement from the White House, Press Secretary Robert Gibbs, saying that, he decided that he couldn't fully embrace and support the president's agenda. Well, which is it? Do you want different viewpoints in there? Or you may
want different viewpoints, but you got to get them on board at the end.
Right, but you can't have it both ways in the end. Are you going to give to the other side?
There's another dimension to this that I don't think the White House has fully thought through. I mean, the electoral incentives for the vast majority of House and Senate Republicans are not toward working with President Obama. After 2 elections in which they've lost substantial ground, the Republicans have been reduced to essentially, almost all of them are representing conservative constituencies. 26 of the 41 Senate Republicans from the South or the Northern Mountain Plains. Almost all of the House Republicans from districts that George W. Bush carried in 2004. On the other hand, Obama did have support for this plan from Republican governors like Charlie Crist and Arnold Schwarzenegger, and even more strikingly from Republican-leaning interest groups like the Chamber of Commerce and the National Association of Manufacturers. The Chamber of Commerce spent about $60 million trying to beat Democratic senators in 2008 and endorse this plan. And ultimately, I think the definition of bipartisanship, it would be a mistake for him to allow them to be defined solely by congressional Republicans rather than an attempt to build an inclusive coalition that includes a lot of interests that Democrats don't usually sit down with.
All right. Thanks, guys, very much. See you soon.
The weekly Meet the Press newsletter from MSNBC.com, delivered straight to your email. Get the latest news and find out who will meet the press each week.